was a dark and stormy night, and Sarah was driving home from work. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind was howling through the trees. As she drove down the winding country road, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was following her. Suddenly, her car sputtered to a stop, the engine dead. She tried to restart it, but nothing happened. Panicked, she grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. She was completely alone, in the middle of nowhere. As she sat there in the darkness, she heard a sound outside. Something was scratching at the window. She tried to ignore it, but it kept getting louder, more insistent. Finally, she mustered the courage to look out the window. There in the pouring rain, she saw a figure standing in the distance. It was too far away to make out any features, but she could feel its malevolent gaze fixed on her. She tried to start the car again, but it wouldn't budge. The scratching at the window continued, now accompanied by a tapping sound. Sarah was frozen with fear, unable to move. Suddenly, the tapping turned into pounding, and the figure outside began to move closer. As it approached, Sarah could make out more details. It was a woman, with wild hair and eyes that glinted in the darkness. Her clothes were soaked through, and she looked like she had been wandering in the rain for hours. The woman began to speak, in a voice that was both pleading and menacing. "Let me in," she said. "I need your help." Sarah hesitated, unsure of what to do. But then she remembered the stories her grandmother had told her about spirits who roamed the countryside, seeking out unsuspecting victims. She knew she couldn't let this woman in. The pounding on the window grew more frantic, and Sarah could see that the woman was no longer alone. A group of shadowy figures had gathered around her, all of them reaching out for her. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to block out the sounds and images that were flooding her senses. But when she opened them again, the woman was right in front of her, pressing her face against the glass. Sarah screamed and tried to back away, but she was trapped in the car. The woman's eyes seemed to glow brighter, and Sarah could feel herself being pulled towards her. She knew she was about to be dragged into the darkness, to become one of the lost souls who wander the countryside. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the pounding stopped. The woman and her companions vanished into the night, leaving Sarah alone in the car. She sat there for a long time, trembling with fear and gratitude that she had escaped with her life. From that day on, Sarah never drove down that road again, but she always felt like something was watching her, waiting for its chance to strike. Years passed, and Sarah tried to forget the horror of that night. She moved away from the countryside and started a new life in the city. But even in the bustling streets and crowded sidewalks, she could still feel the presence of the spirits that haunted her. One day, as she was walking home from work, she saw a woman in the distance. She looked familiar, but Sarah couldn't place her. As the woman drew closer, Sarah could see that she was the same woman who had appeared to her on that stormy night so many years ago. The woman looked different now, her hair no longer wild and her eyes no longer glowing. But there was something about her that made Sarah's skin crawl. She tried to walk faster, to put as much distance between them as possible, but the woman kept following her. Finally, Sarah turned around and confronted her. "What do you want?" she demanded. The woman looked at her with sad, haunted eyes. "I need your help," she said. "I'm lost, and I don't know where to turn." Sarah felt a pang of pity for the woman, but she knew better than to trust her. "I can't help you," she said firmly. "You need to leave me alone." The woman's face twisted into a snarl, and Sarah could see that she was no longer the same person. She was something else entirely, something dark and dangerous. The woman lunged at Sarah, but Sarah was ready for her. She had learned to defend herself over the years, and she fought back with all her might. They tussled on the pavement, rolling and scratching and biting. Sarah could feel the woman's cold, clammy skin against hers, and she knew that this was no ordinary human being. Finally, Sarah managed to break free and run away. She didn't stop until she was safely inside her apartment, with the door locked and bolted. She collapsed onto the couch, panting and sweating, her heart racing with fear. For weeks afterward, Sarah was haunted by nightmares. She saw the woman's face everywhere she went, and she could feel her presence even when she was alone. She started to wonder if the woman had followed her all the way from the countryside, seeking revenge for being rejected that stormy night. In the end, Sarah knew she had to face her fears head-on. She went back to the countryside, to the exact spot where she had encountered the woman years ago. And there, she confronted her once and for all. The woman was waiting for her, surrounded by a group of shadowy figures. But this time, Sarah was ready. She had brought with her a talisman, blessed by a priest, that was said to ward off evil spirits. As the woman and her companions closed in on her, Sarah held out the talisman and recited a prayer. Suddenly, the spirits recoiled, as if burned by some invisible force. They let out a chorus of wails and moans, and then they were gone. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that she had finally banished the spirits that had haunted her for so long. But as she turned to leave, she saw something in the distance. It was a new group of spirits, even darker and more menacing than the first. Sarah knew that her battle was far from over, but she also knew that she was strong enough to face whatever lay ahead. With a heavy heart, Sarah realized that her battle against the forces of darkness was far from over. The sight of the new group of spirits sent shivers down her spine, and she felt a wave of despair wash over her. Would she ever be able to escape the clutches of these malevolent beings? But then she remembered the talisman she was holding in her hand, and the prayer she had recited. Perhaps there was a way to defeat these spirits as well. She closed her eyes and focused her mind, trying to tap into the ancient power of the talisman. When she opened her eyes again, she saw that the spirits had stopped in their tracks. They were watching her with a mix of curiosity and fear, as if unsure what to make of this human who dared to challenge them. Sarah took a deep breath and spoke in a firm, commanding voice. "I banish you," she said. "By the power of this talisman, I banish you from this place and from my life. Go back to the darkness where you belong." To her amazement, the spirits began to retreat. They moved slowly at first, as if testing the strength of the talisman, but then they picked up speed and disappeared into the shadows. Sarah watched them go, feeling a sense of triumph and relief. She knew that she had finally overcome the spirits that had haunted her for so long, and that she had the power to face any challenge that lay ahead. As she walked back to her car, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The storm clouds had lifted, and the moon was shining bright and clear. For the first time in years, Sarah felt truly free. From that day on, she lived her life with a newfound sense of purpose and strength. She knew that there would always be dark forces in the world, but she also knew that she had the power to overcome them. And so she lived day by day, fighting the good fight and never looking back.